Sometimes I think about how much our inner voice changes as we age. It used to be noisy, hurried, often anxious. But now, it seems to be learning to speak more quietly. And you know, I've noticed one interesting thing. The less we repeat certain phrases out loud, the easier it becomes inside. Not because we stop thinking, but because we stop punishing ourselves with words. I remember a woman who was 74 once telling me, "I don't say that to myself anymore. And, you know, for the first time in a long time, I feel free." That made me think. And then I started to notice with different women, smart, strong, who have lived a lot, how over the years they changed not only their habits, but also the language they use to talk to themselves. And so today I want to talk to you about 5 phrases that women after 70 give up, and they become, not younger, no, but as if happier. I remember one summer I went to visit an acquaintance. We hadn't seen each other in a long time, and I just wanted to see her. She's in her 70s, but she's one of those women people say shines from within. Not because of makeup, not because of clothes, but because she has that rare quietness that appears when a person stops fighting with themselves. We were sitting on the veranda, drinking tea with lemon, and she suddenly said, "You know, in the past year I've stopped saying certain things to myself. I just crossed them out of my speech, and I feel lighter." That struck me, because before I probably wouldn't have paid attention. People say all sorts of things. But at that moment I realized these aren't random words. This was the result. A conclusion after many years spent among expectations, obligations, other people's opinions, and inner dialogues that didn't allow for peace. And since then, I've started paying attention to what exactly women her age say, and most importantly, what they no longer say, and why it only becomes calmer, easier, warmer inside. That's what I want to talk to you about. By the way, if this topic resonates with you and you feel that these kinds of conversations are important, you can subscribe to the channel. Everything here will be exactly like this, calm, honest, and without cliches, just like we're talking today. When I started to notice which phrases fall out of the speech of women as they age, one of the first was this: "It's too late for me to start." Familiar phrase, right? It sounds almost harmless, almost logical. But in reality, it's like an invisible wall that we put between ourselves and our own selves. The real one. Alive. Curious. Brave. I have an acquaintance. Susan, she was 73 when she signed up for a watercolor class at the library. Before that, she worked in insurance, raised 2 children. Her husband left about 10 years ago. And at some point, emptiness. She says, "I just realized that nothing in this house is mine. Everything is for someone, for the sake of someone, at a convenient time for everyone. And me? Where was I in this life?" And now she sits in her kitchen, among jars of paints and some magical landscapes with lighthouses, and says, "This isn't for sale. I'm not trying to become an artist. Just, when I paint, I'm silent inside." And another woman, Joan, 75 years old, went to learn to play the piano. From scratch, without any musical ear, without ambitions. She said, "I know I'll never play beautifully, but it doesn't matter. I just want to one day sit down at the instrument and play a melody that I chose myself, just for myself." And another one, Evelyn, 78, lived in Ohio her whole life, then one day simply sold her house and moved to Oregon. I asked, "Why?" She shrugged and said, "Because I always wanted to wake up and see the mountains. And now, finally, I can afford it." That's what's important. None of them did it for the benefit. It's not about self-development, not about a new version of yourself. It's about the right to finally choose, to be not reasonable, not useful, but alive. When we tell ourselves it's too late to start, more often than not, it's not age that's behind it, but fear. Fear of looking ridiculous. Fear of being inexperienced. Fear of admitting that you want something. But the truth is, after a certain age, you don't owe anything to anyone, especially shame. So if you catch yourself thinking, "It's too late for me," ask yourself an honest question. Who exactly am I saying this to? Who wrote this late into my schedule? Because if you're still here, if you're still breathing, if you have even a drop of curiosity left, then nothing is too late. And next, we'll talk about one very common phrase that sounds polite and even caring, But in reality, it slowly over the years eats away at our sense of self-worth. I'll tell you what that phrase is, and how women, after stopping saying it, finally regain their strength. Stay with me. It will be truly important. The second phrase that women stop saying as they age, and breathe more freely, is, "What will others think?" At first glance it seems, well, what's the big deal? Just an expression that we say to ourselves so as not to do stupid things. But if you dig deeper, it turns out to be a real anchor. And the saddest thing is, it's almost invisible. It's been built into us for years, especially in women. I was talking to a woman named Mary once. She was 76 at the time. She said how she had spent her whole life choosing clothes not according to her taste, but so as not to attract attention. Even the color of nail polish, always neutral, not flashy. And then, a couple of years ago, she just put on a bright yellow coat, for no reason, no holiday, just because she suddenly wanted to. And she says, "I was walking down the street and kept waiting for someone to turn around, point a finger at their temple, but no one said anything, and I felt warm and good. I felt not younger, but real." That's the whole point. What will others think is a cage that we often put ourselves in, and the door isn't locked. We've just gotten used to sitting there. We're afraid of appearing strange, funny, stupid, and in the end, we become convenient, safe, colorless. But there's little happiness in that. I knew a woman, her name was Barbara, who started dancing Argentine tango at 80. She said, "I was embarrassed that I was the oldest in the hall, but then I realized if I don't start now, I'll regret it. And if I start and look ridiculous, then it will only be 90 seconds of awkwardness. And what is 90 seconds compared to a whole life?" Want a truly interesting paradox? With age, many women experience a growth in inner freedom, but it only begins to manifest when the question, "What will they say?" disappears. It's as if the world around actually becomes quieter when you stop looking at it with anxiety. And so I want to ask you, have you ever given up something just because it's strange? Just because someone, somewhere, might think something unflattering? And now ask yourself a second question, and it may be a little more difficult. Did you feel any easier because of that refusal? We don't live in other people's heads. We don't have to meet their expectations, especially when we've made up those expectations ourselves. And by the way, don't switch channels, because the next phrase looks polite, almost noble, but it often hides a chronic sense of guilt, which makes a woman not caring but invisible. I'll tell you what that phrase is, and why. By giving it up, a woman begins for the first time not just to be near others, but to be near herself. The third phrase that women after 70 give up, and they do it not by chance at all, is, "I don't want to bother anyone." You've heard that, haven't you? Maybe said it yourself. This is a phrase that seems to speak of modesty, of tact, but if you listen closely, something else often sounds in it. A quiet feeling that you are an inconvenience, that your requests are unnecessary, that your existence costs someone effort. I've heard women say this in the most ordinary situations. "Don't worry, I'll somehow carry it myself. I won't call, you're probably busy. I don't want to bother you, I just wanted to hear your voice." And now their voice is already trembling, and the conversation ends faster than it should. I remember once Cindy, the woman was about 74, said to me, "I realized that I had been apologizing for existing my whole life, and then I thought, who am I doing a favor to when I pretend that I don't need anything?" It wasn't at a therapy session. We were just standing in line for coffee. She was telling me how, for the first time, she called a handyman to fix her faucet, although she usually tried to fix it herself, until not only water, but also her own nerves started to leak. And so she says, "When he left, I cried, because for the first time in a long time, I didn't do everything myself. And you know, nothing terrible happened." That was so accurate, because here it is, the great lie of the phrase, "I don't want to bother anyone." It tells us that being needed is bad, that asking is a sign of weakness. But you know what I notice? Women who give up this phrase suddenly start to receive more warmth, not because they've become capricious, but because they've become honest. I have an acquaintance. Her name is Nancy. She's 79 now. She has arthritis. It's hard for her to cook. And she just once told her daughter, "I would really appreciate it if you brought me some soup. I know you're busy, but I'm also a person who sometimes wants care." and her daughter brought it, not because she had to, but because she could. Because her mother stopped being strong until the very end, and simply spoke up. Strength is not when you drag everything on yourself until you collapse. Real strength is when you allow others to be near you, not as rescuers, but as people who also want to be needed. Think, how many times have you refused help just because you didn't want to bother? And now, imagine that you allowed it, permitted it, opened up, and the world didn't fall apart, and maybe even became a little warmer. Next, I'll talk about a phrase that sounds modest, almost poetic, but in reality, it deeply hurts. It's a phrase that we say while looking in the mirror, often, in a whisper, and it slowly carves out our self-esteem. And you know, when women stop saying it, there's such a calm in them, almost like in the sea before dawn. If you're listening and catch yourself thinking, yes, I felt that, give it a like. Not for me, but so that YouTube understands. These topics are needed. Maybe then someone else will get this conversation at the right moment. The fourth phrase that women after 70 give up, not because they've enlightened, but because they're tired of the pain, is, I'm not as good as I used to be. This phrase often sounds with a half laugh, almost coquettishly, with such a light sadness, you know, as if we are talking about shoes that have become a little tight. But in fact, every time a woman says this about herself, she surrenders a small territory, gives away a piece of respect for herself in exchange for the habit of downplaying her worth. And I hear it often, too often. I'm not as fast anymore. I don't look the same anymore. I'm not old enough to... And this not anymore becomes a refrain, as if all the best versions of yourself remained in the past. But you know what's amazing? I've noticed that women who stop thinking that way develop a different, very powerful energy. It's not youth, it's clarity. I remember one woman, Judith, 75, said at a meeting, I've started to look different, but I've become myself. Before, I was liked. Now I'm respected. Before I tried to be convenient. Now I choose who to even talk to. And it didn't sound bitter, but calm, confident, almost like a blessing to herself. When you're young, you live under a constant ruler of comparison, with others, with yourself, with some mythical ideal. And then, the time comes to let go of the ruler, because you are no longer obligated to be better than you were to anyone. It's enough just to be. You know who the most interesting person in the room is? Not the one who's younger, and not even the one who's the most confident, but the one who doesn't make excuses for themselves, who doesn't joke about their wrinkles, doesn't hide their hands, doesn't nod to their age, just is present, completely, with history, with experience, with the wrinkles around their eyes that remained from 1,000 real smiles. If you've ever said to yourself, I'm not the same, I want to ask you, are you even sure that that one was better? Or did you just remember her better because you were still trying to please back then? Or maybe you are now, the most real, finally without tension, without chasing, without self-censorship. And if you're still doubting, wait for the next part, because the last phrase on our list looks like a virtue, as if the person is strong, composed, and adult. But in reality, it's a phrase that slowly burns out the right to be happy. We often pronounce it almost mechanically, and then we wonder why it's so heavy in our chest. And I'll tell you what happens when a woman gives it up. Just don't be surprised. There's a real revolution in this, quiet but strong. The fifth phrase that women give up, and for the first time in a long time start breathing fully, is, I just have to endure. You've probably heard this phrase 1,000 times, maybe even today. Someone said it in the store, standing in line, or on the phone, explaining why she doesn't leave her grown son, who lives with her and yells. Someone whispered it, falling asleep with the thought, this too shall pass. And it seems like there's something strong in that. To endure means to hold on, to be strong, not to fall. Especially women often say this with such developed restraint, as if it is heroism. But you know what I notice? Inside this phrase often lives learned helplessness. Because in its depths, it sounds like, I can't ask for another. I have no right to want more. I must stand, even if I stand alone. I knew a woman, her name was Patricia, she was 79, who had been enduring her whole life, endured a boring marriage, endured an uncomfortable life in a house where she was lonely, endured the endless wait for calls that never came. And one day, just stopped. She moved to a small apartment in the center, got a cat, started drinking coffee on the balcony and said, "I lived 40 years telling myself I have to endure. And now, finally, I want to live without expecting that pain is some kind of obligation." It wasn't an impulse, not a rebellion. It was a mature weariness with the idea that everything should be difficult. Otherwise, you're selfish. Because we have so often been told that patience is almost a spiritual order, patience as a mission, patience as a way to be a good woman. But the truth is that sometimes to endure means to give up your life in favor of someone else's comfort. But here's what's interesting. When women give up this phrase, they don't become capricious. They become honest. They start to say, "I don't want to put up with this. This pace of life doesn't suit me. I deserve silence, or on the contrary, a celebration." And there's not a drop of weakness in that. Only adult, mature self-care. Finally, so if you also tell yourself, "I'll just endure, everything will pass," I want to ask, how many more years are you going to live in "wait, it'll be easier later" mode? Or maybe you can already live without strain. Without the idea that you absolutely have to suffer for happiness? Maybe you've already been through everything you needed to endure, and now you have every right to live in pleasure and not in survival mode. And if something resonated in you now, if for even a moment you thought, "Damn, that's about me," then you're already on the path. Because all you need is to stop telling yourself other people's words and start talking like a woman who is no longer her own enemy. Sometimes, to feel lighter, we don't need to start with something big. We don't need to buy tickets to Japan, change our wardrobe, or marry an Australian tour guide. Sometimes it's enough just to stop saying to ourselves what makes us small. Stop repeating those quiet but heavy phrases that we carry in ourselves for years, like old winter clothes that no one asked us to put on in the summer. "It's too late for me. What will others think? I don't want to bother anyone. I'm not the same anymore. I just have to endure." Each of them sounds almost harmless, but in fact, they are disguised rejections from life, from joy, from the freedom to be yourself without footnotes. And women who one day stop saying these phrases, they don't become different. They just return to themselves, without apologies, without a role, without trying to be convenient. So, if you're listening to this now and something trembled in you, know you are not alone. This is a path that many are already on, and maybe you are right now, at its beginning. Don't rush, just listen to yourself, to what you really want to say, and what it's long past time to stop saying. I'll be there. And if you want, we'll continue this conversation. And now tell me, which phrase is most familiar to you? Which one sounds in you more often than others? Write in the comments. I read everything. And you'll be surprised how many women will feel less lonely when they see that you said it first. If you want a continuation, subscribe. It will be easier for me to understand that such a conversation is important to someone. And a like, by the way, can be given simply as a sign. I heard, thank you.